Hey team, welcome to the art style tutorial for the Studio 2 project. Today we're going to be walking through some examples of what we're doing and then later on the technical side of which buttons to press to actually do them. So you've probably heard the term painterly art style when we were going over the first meeting. So what do I mean by that? I mean like something where you can physically see the paint strokes on the actual object, so it looks like it has been actually painted. It's a two-dimensional style in a three-dimensional space. And then here's just a reminder of everything that we're doing for the art style. Since this assignment is going to be based on a prop, the composition doesn't really apply, and obviously it's going to be a three-dimensional prop, so make it three-dimensional. So the purpose of this tutorial is to kind of like build cognitive layers in your mind to process reality through the art style into something usable for the game. And so we're going to start by looking at some examples of games that actually use painterly styles. Like this one's called Sifu, and you can see over on the side here, you can see it's not a gradation of color like it typically would be in a realistic setting. It's a you can definitely see the layers of color going on here. There's grunge. Yeah, you can see all of this different grunge texture going on, and then right here it's a really hard line, but it still makes sense. It looks like it's been gone over with a fan brush is exactly what this looks like, and it works really well. And then this one is just another example. And then here we have a really good example from Arcane of a prop, how this works. Metals have kind of a different rule book, and we'll go over that later, but you can see that logic is being thrown out the window. We're not texturing something how it would stereotypically be in reality. I mean, except for the edges being brighter, this is all completely made up. This texture on the blue part here, where is this coming from? It doesn't make sense. It's just maximum pretty. That's all we're going for. Oh yeah, here's a good example of how to do metals. I took this photo in Savannah, and the edges of brass, since we're doing a lot of steampunk things and we're going to have a lot of brass, always please make the edges of the brass the brightest part, and then the interior is almost a brown. It's like you can really make that kind of gunky. And here's a really good example of that from Arcane. You can have the edges of this person's uniform being really bright, almost gold, and then the interior is this dark brownish color, and that contrast creates a really nice effect. And then the last component of the art style is making the form of the object a little bit distorted in some way. And there's some pretty good examples of everything kind of coming together, like this sword. A good way to do the distortion is slim to thick, this kind of curvilinear segment on an object. And then this dagger puts everything together really well. It's got a distorted form, and it has some clear damage, some character to it, and then it definitely looks like it has been painted. Oh, I have some really good examples of distorting the form, like this game right here. When I say like janky, I mean just kind of cartoonish in style, instead of like destroying the object and just moving a bunch of vertices out of the way. It has to be intentional. It has to give the object character. And then Crash Bandicoot, the newest one, is a really good example of how to do that as well. So because this assignment is a prop, I don't know if you've ever seen this photo before, but this is a color theory exercise called Albers. These two colors are actually the same thing, but they look completely different because of what they're next to. So when it comes to an environment that we're making and your prop, keep in mind that you may need to go back and repurpose, retexture a prop to make it fit the overall scene, because on its own, I'm sure it's going to look great, but in the context of a scene, it needs to make sense. So today, we're going to be going over this door here, this is the reference, and then the model, and then the textured model. And then at the very end, we're going to be going over some stuff with metals on what I think is going to end up being the starter weapon of the game. And the process of how we're going to do this is mostly mostly art theory, back to the fundamentals. Oh, before we get into that though, we're going to be using a program called PureRef, or at least I like to use it. It's incredibly helpful. It allows you to display an image over everything on your desktop, any window that you pull up, and you can keep all of your references in it. It's completely free. All you have to do is go to the website and type in 0 in the box. It changes the web page to be a lot more passive aggressive, and then you can get it for free. So, a mini color theory lecture that we need to go over. Typically, since we're working in computer graphics, we're going to be doing things in RGB. Everything will be computed as RGB. But because this is a painterly style, we're going to pretend like it's CMYK, like it's actual physical colors that we're going to be mixing together. Another thing that we should do is with stylized art, the best way to get your colors to pop is like if I had a base color red here and I needed to make it darker in some areas, then instead of just making the red darker, I would also shift the hue to be a little bit cooler and more saturated. That's what I'm doing here. It goes red to a cooler, more saturated purple. And then I would do the exact opposite. If I wanted to make the color a little bit lighter, I would make it slightly less saturated and a little bit warmer. And that's when you put all of those together, it's a lot more vibrant than just the solid gradation. So let's look at some examples of how this is working on the door. So right here is a really good example of mixing paint. I wanted to make a neutral color here, and so I took an orangish and then a purplish, and then I sort of layered them together, made it seem like there was paint strokes, combining it all together, and then the base is the boring color gray. And to contrast that here, this is an intentionally bad example, this gray part. This is how flat it can look when you're only using pure gray as compared to colors that make a neutral tone. Look how much more lively this is compared to this. And then the other part is this darker area of the door. This is actually purple, but it makes sense when compared to the rest of the reds because it's a gradation and it's been sort of painted on. So that is an example of hue shifting down in a darker area. And another thing that we're going to be doing, we are not going to be doing hardly any hand painting. We're going to be faking it because nobody has the time to hand paint every single prop in a video game. So I found this really neat paint stroke generator for our Substance Designer. It's super intuitive. I can walk y'all through how to use it, or I could just generate some maps and then put them in the Discord. Does not matter. And then how we're actually going to do this in practice, let's get to it. Before we go into the texturing, I wanted to go over some things in the Maya file for the door really quick. As you can see, I've modeled the door to be, more or less exactly like the reference. And in order to get that stylized effect really quickly, all I've done is add a flare deformer. And to do that is you go to deform, nonlinear, flare. And then with this, you can do some really interesting stuff. You can produce all sorts of really fun effects. I'm pretty sure Fortnite uses this all the time. And in order to get the actual deformed object, all you have to do is clone it over while it's still being deformed. Because if I delete this right now, it's just going to spring right back to normal. And then for the gun prop, weapons are an interesting area for deforming an object because if we make it too weird looking, I mean, since it's first person, it's going to take up a significant portion of the screen, and if we bend it too much, it's just going to look off. So instead, I think really emphasizing the steampunkness of it is going to help a lot. And also you can add little chips in the metal like this right here to give the object character. Those are just a few ways to do it, some ideas. Okay team, so here we are in Painter with the door, and the first thing I want to do is point out that when you're doing stylized art, when you're working for roughness, the roughness is always going to be 1 unless it's metallic or something inherently glossy like glass or water. And that's just to keep everything really consistent, and it makes it flatter in some ways. I mean, the base color channel is really doing most of the work. Honestly, I could treat this exactly like a painting and put it in Unreal in unlit mode, and it would almost work. That's the idea. So, first things first. After I pointed that out, we're gonna erase everything. And if you guys ever need to take a break, because this is gonna be a lot of information that I'm gonna throw at you, go ahead and just pause the video and wait until you're ready to do this again because it's gonna be a lot. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. First thing we're gonna do is go ahead and bake. This doesn't have a high poly, I'm just baking the low to itself right now. And then boom, we got our channels. And I also went and added a fill layer and set the roughness to 1. I'm just going to call this the base roughness. That way I only have to worry about the color channel and everything else. Yeah, like so. So first thing we're going to do is I want to add a really nice gray around the edges. So I'm going to call this folder, to make a folder you just press Ctrl G. I'm just going to call this stone. And I'm going to add a black mask to that folder and select the object thing. There we go. Now every object that I'm selecting is now under the stone folder. And I'm just going to repeat this process until all of my areas are segmented. Okay, so now that we've done that, you've probably noticed that I'm only using fill layers, and even though we are doing a very painterly style, we're hardly going to be doing any hand painting, so could you could fool me and everyone else on the team and go ahead and hand paint all of the details onto your object, but it takes, I don't know, 4 times as long, and you don't have the advantage of being able to change it later like you can with the fill layer. So that's why I really like the fill layer masking approach. So let's start with our stone. We have a really nice pearly purplish gray as a base. Since this is a Western theme, I'm going to make that a little bit more dusty. Yeah. So on top of this, I'm going to add yet another fill layer, and I'm going to set that to a nice orangish color. Still pretty neutral though. And then I'm going to add a black mask to this. Add a fill layer, and then I'm going to go search up that paint strokes thing I got from the Substance Designer generator. And if we look at the mask channel, that's exactly what's happening right now in the fill on the black mask. And I can change the scale of this, and I can rotate it to be whatever I want. So on the edges here, I'm thinking, yeah, that's looking nice. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with more of a purple. Maybe make that even, yeah, about that saturated. Keep in mind that everything I'm doing is purely for demo purposes, and it's not going to look as good as when you do it. How's that? And for this one, I'm going to add a fill, but I'm not going to use the paint mask. This is another way to do it. I'm going to add, let's say, black and white spots. So this is a nice noise generator for Unreal. We don't necessarily always have to be using the paint strokes, but it does add a nice touch. And noise is always appreciated. I need to change the balance on that. So now I'm going to go to Filter, Blur Slope. And if we look at the mask here, I'm going to change the base color in just a second. Blur Slope kind of fakes that painterly style. Really easy way to do that. I'm just going to make the contrast on these layers a little bit higher. And now that we have the base color done, I'm going to go ahead and label it as such. So I'm going to group those 2 layers. Oh, those 3 layers because we have the base gray as well. Yeah, when making a neutral, always start out with just the neutral tone you're going for and then layer over your contrasting colors. And I'm just going to call this base color. And then on top of that, we're going to be adding a little bit of character to the object. Dirt, grunge, a little bit of moss around it maybe. Just give it a history of the object. And so a really easy way to do this, to add some depth to it, is, let's see, the base color is something like that. So I want it more saturated and a little bit darker. Yeah, we'll fix that later. But can add a black mask, go to generator, ambient occlusion. And at first this is going to look really weird, but if I go to my mask channel, I can see that all the white parts are coming through as the mask. I need to invert that, and that's going to make the darker areas of my object a lot more purple. Obviously, right now this is way too much. It looks something like Willy Wonka's Funhouse. But if we play with the color a little bit, we can get it to really pop. Make that brownish. Yeah, orange a little bit. Yeah, a nice red. Okay, and after that, let's add some character to it. This is the only time when we would be hand painting an object, is when we're like adding little bits and bobs, like this dirt over here. Right, so I'm going to sample that dirt color, make it a little bit darker and slightly more saturated. Black mask, add a a fill, and before we do anything, I'm gonna throw on, yeah, why not? Let's do another one of these. Increase the balance and the contrast. Gonna blur slope it. That's about right. But after that, I'm gonna stick it in yet another folder so I can control it with another black mask, and then I'm going to say add a paint. And then over in my paintbrushes, I'm gonna pick this one, and I can now lower my opacity and add dirt where I want it. And I still get that nice grungy look. And then just to contrast that, I'm going to do the exact same thing but with a green color to add a little bit of nature growing over the area. And then just to contrast that, I'm going to do the exact same thing but with a green color to add a little bit of nature growing over the area. The last thing I'm going to do on the stone is make the edges a little bit brighter. So we're going to take one of the lightest colors from the reference, make that just a hint more saturated. Add a black mask to it, and then go to Generator, Curvature. And if we look at a mask channel, that's what this is doing. Since we've baked our curvature map, it's just following that. So I'm going to add a filter to this, and it's going to be Warp. Warp is magical, and just kind of breaks up your edges a little bit to be less severe. And I think that needs just a little bit more on the balance and contrast. Yeah, you can see that really working down here. And for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to call the frame done. Naturally, we'd go over that a lot more. But for the door section, this is where things actually get interesting. So I've sampled the main color of the door from the reference, but now since it's a primary color, um, I'm only going to add variations in the tone instead of mixing different colors to like make red. Well, you can't do that because it's red. And I also recommend doing this with secondaries as well. I would only really mix for neutral colors, because if I was trying to make a green with just blue and yellow, it would probably look kind of weird. You could definitely try it, and I would be really impressed if you pulled it off, but I don't know how it would work out. So I'm going to add a fill, and then I'm going to go to my paint strokes thing I brought in. And if you're unhappy with how your mask is working out. Maybe it's too intense, there's too much white area on it. Go ahead and add a levels, and then you can just bring that right down. There we go. And I'm gonna change the sizing of this too. Great. And then I'm going to add the same thing, just with a lighter color. There we go. I'm actually going to change the opacity of this one just a wee bit. And so this is what I like to call, it's the new state of the door. This thing was just painted, so I'm going to call this, I don't know, just painted. This is the door without anything bad ever happening to it. It is, you know, in its raw state. But, you know, things happen, the door ages, nicks get put into place. So something that happens a lot over time is sun damage. So on top of all this, I'm going to add another lighter area where it's been bleached. Go to the lightest spot. There we go. Add a black mask, and I'm going to use a generator. And for this one, I'm going to be using 3D distance. What this is going to do is add a point on my object, which I can move around. And it's acting almost like a miniature sun where the mask is radiating out from. So I'm going to set it right about there. And you can see that this color is poking through on top of everything else. And I'm going to increase the contrast just a little bit, and now you can see it for what it really is. And for this, I'm going to stick it in another folder, add a black mask, and for that fill, I'm just going to use that again. And bring down the levels. We don't need that. But I am going to make this color a little bit lighter, just to contrast. And now more yellow as per the color guide. And you're like, well, that's probably a little bit too intense, and you would be absolutely right. Whenever you want to control a mask on top of a mask on top of a mask, just stick it in another folder. It's the easiest way to do it. So for this, I'm going to add another fill. And let's do a noise this time. Noise. I don't know, let's do clouds 1. Woohoo, noise. And then I can go ahead and slap a blur slope on this. There we go. That's starting to look like something. And if I'm unhappy with it, I can go all the way back to the original layer. There we go. Now it's been damaged from the sun over time. Perfect. And then, in contrast, things will slowly get condensed at the bottom over time. So I'm going to add a darker color at the bottom, that more purplish hue like we were talking about earlier. Yeah, let's go for another noise to contrast the paint strokes. I hope this is making sense. I know I tend to ramble. And I'm going to speed up bits of this to make it, more worth your time. But as you can see, this is very different from stereotypical photorealism in a lot of ways. I mean, the base color channel is doing 90% of the work all the time. And keep in mind that I'm not really thinking about this as we go. Yeah, I'm going to do a generator with this. And let's say I'm going to do a 3D linear gradient this time. So I'm going to go down to my position mask. And then this is a really handy tool. I can say, all right, on the position, the mask is going to start right there and end about there in a gradient, like that. And I'm going to invert that really quick. There we go. I think that red and that purple is a little too purple now. It's got some damage, it's got some sun on it. And now this is where we get to add the real fun for the door is now we can have the wood that's underneath and been exposed. So for this, I'm not going to start with the color, I'm going to start with the height, believe it or not. So I'm going to increase the height layer a little bit, add a black mask, and then for this, everybody and their mom has seen the wood 1 texture. This one. Please never use this. Instead, what we're going to do is anisotropic noise. There we go. And it's going to look really wrong at first, but if we shrink it down, go to the noise parameters, we can change a whole bunch of shit about this. I'm going to go to the Y amount, really increase that. Also, I'm going to rotate it. There we go. Now it's going in the direction of my wood. And material. Now you can kind of see how that would be interpreted as wood. That's too much. Back to my height. There we go. Now we're going to add a filter, and on that filter we're going to make this warp. And this is not going to be your stereotypical warp. Instead, we're going to go to custom noise and type in Perlin noise. That's going to show you how we're distorting our mask. And in order to make it use Perlin noise, you have to go to custom noise. If I change the intensity, it's going to very nicely warp things generally instead of in that tiny little area like you were seeing. I'm just going to change the divider here. Ooh, too much. There we go. Now that's wood. I'm also going to change the random C to that a few times till I get something I like. There we go. So if we go back to our material. Alright, well now the door has some wood grain, but we don't typically want that. Keep in mind that we're only doing the actual wood section right now. So now that we have the mask going, actually I want to do one more thing to this. Could add another warp. There we go, that's wood. Yeah. I'm going to add the base color of the wood now. Trying to make this lighter so I can contrast the door a bit. There we go. I'm gonna black mask this, and then we're gonna go to our mask for the wood grain. Go ahead and go copy mask, paste into mask. I think we need to invert this. Invert mask. There we go. Now we're gonna get shadows in the area, like fake color shadows in the area, like so. And I'm gonna do the exact opposite with lighter areas. Now that the wood is functional for the entire door, I'm just gonna call this wood. Gonna add a black mask to that folder, and we're back to the paint. So now this is another part where we would hand paint where we want that wood to be. So my stroke opacity is gonna be way down, and I'm gonna go over here as per the concept and just start making some grungy strokes. And with everything, if it's not already being filtered by paint strokes, I'm going to go ahead and filter it in a blur slope. Crank that intensity. There we go. If you really wanted to, you could do this with a noise. Add a fill. and then go to something like black and white spots, contrast, balance. But honestly, I don't really recommend it unless you're really short on time because it's just too general and you can't control it well enough. So now that we got exposed wood and the potential to expose more wood whenever we want, I'm going to go ahead and add in a few more details just to make the door feel more believable. First one is I'm going to do the same thing as we did on the stones, where I'm going to take a darker hue and use the ambient occlusion generator, just to make the shadows deeper. That's nice. Got the effect of it being painted. Last thing I'm going to do is make some edges brighter. Add a generator. For edges, I always use the curvature generator. Gonna make that even lighter. A little bit more yellow. I know it might look weird at the moment, but it'll make sense in a second. But that's a little too predictable, so I'm gonna add a warp filter. Okay guys, we're gonna speed this up a little bit because it's going long already. So back to the door. Since I have most of the door done, you know, I've got some edge wear on it, I've got shadows, I've got painterly effects, I've got exposed wood. Something that is often done in oil painting that we're gonna do too, is we're gonna take a nice color, get the value from whatever you're sourcing, and then make that into an opposing color. Since it's red, I'm going to be using a green. Add a filter, oh no, add a fill. Do a noise, whatever you want, I don't know. What's liquid? That's cool. And then I'm going to be controlling that with another mask, black mask, add a paint. And then my stroke opacity is down pretty low. But I'm just going to go over it and then add little parts to the door, wherever really, that could use a little bit of contrast. And typically you could make your contrast color a very neutral tone, like so. But it just adds some really nice pop. There's really no rhyme or reason to where to put these contrasting colors. Like it didn't look right there, but over here it might. This is at your own prerogative. And since it has been warped already, I'm gonna add a filter and go to blur slope. There we go. And now we get a very painterly look to that. And then I'm gonna label this folder contrast 1. And then I'm gonna do the exact same thing with a different color. Filter, blur slope, perfection. And once you've done a few contrast colors, we're not going to worry about the glass today because I don't even really know what this is going to be. This is just an example project. We're going to get rid of that paint that I forgot to get rid of. And then we're going to do some baked lighting effects. So it's really important to add a fill layer. Don't touch the base color at all. Add a generator straight to the layer. Don't use a black mask. Turn off everything in the generator except for color. Oh, no, my bad. Filter. Add a filter. Turn off everything in the filter except for color and go to Baked Lighting Stylized. And you're also going to want to set your layer to, instead of normal, to soft light. And that is going to allow you to create some really cool effects. You can go around and play with all the different parameters in here, but basically what it's doing is pretending like your scene is lit already. and it just creates some really nice shadows, and also it looks a little bit more painterly in general. It blends all of your colors together a little bit. And if we look at without, with, so this is just a really nice thing to have. It might look odd in a scene with everything else in an environment because the shadows are kind of pre-computed here. But I wouldn't worry about it too much, especially for this prop thing that we're doing. Go ahead and use this filter. And the last thing I did is I added a little bit of a metallic sheen. That looks weird. To parts of the door. For gold, I would go way saturated on the gold and make it almost, yeah, orange. Black mask. Wood to fill. And I think I did a fabric texture. They have all these really neat fabric masks and generators and substance. And for shits, let's do this one. Yeah, why not? Let's do that. I'm going to stick this in a folder, black mask it, go to my UV shell selector and just select those UV shells where I want it. And then I'm going to, well, I'm going to stick this in a folder. And I'm going to add a fill, get a noise. There we go. And I'm going to blur slope this. Pretty intensely. There we go. That's a really cool effect to add onto a door. It's just a very hint of metallic. And just a little bit of change in the roughness map. And for the sake of this exercise, this door is finished. Alright team, now we're back in Painter with a different file. This is the starter weapon of the game. And we're going to be doing some brass steampunk areas. That's what this is going to be. So first thing we're going to do, make a metal fill layer. Roughness is pretty good right there, but I am going to sample the color. And I'm going to make it pretty dang bright, like that. And that's well and good. But yeah, I'm going to need to change the roughness. So I'm going to make the roughness a little bit, I don't know, rougher. Add a black mask to this, and then this is where things are going to start getting a little bit more grungy. And let's go ahead and add a fill. I'm going to use our mask. Oh, I haven't imported into this file yet. I'll just show you how to do that. Go to wherever you have it. Literally just drag it in. Say you're importing it as a texture and import it to whichever one of these options you want. I'm going to import it to this file. And it's going to show me exactly where I put it. Boom. I like it right there. There we go. Now we can get our edges looking really sharp. Thank you guys so much for watching that. I don't blame you if you skip parts, but the general gist is use the paint masks and the blur slope generator and fill layers for getting isolated individual paint flecks like so. Mix on your neutrals and make your metals bright around the edges. Good luck!